So hello, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Sullivan, and on behalf of the Adelphi Society for Psychoanalysis and Psychotherapy, or ASPP, our entire leadership team, Danielle Eisenberg, Rakefet Gruberg, Megan Nolan, Dustin Cahood, and I would like to welcome you to the final presentation of our 2024 Meet the Author series. This seminar will run for an hour and a half. The formal presentation will last about an hour, and then during the remaining time, we will have the Q&A, during which we invite your questions and comments by using the Zoom raise hand feature. If you have questions or comments during the presentation, please feel free to write them in the chat box. Today's event is not HIPAA compliant and we are recording it. We will post an edited video on our YouTube channel in a few weeks. Please keep this in mind, and if you feel compelled to bring up any case material during our discussion, please keep it brief, relevant, and extremely de-identified. Safeguarding the confidentiality of clinical material is the cornerstone of all our clinical practices. If you would like CE credits, you must be present for 90 minutes, which will be monitored automatically. The evaluation will be emailed to you in the next 24 hours only if you have met the 90-minute time requirement. Please fill it out and return it within 3 days, and your CE certificate will be emailed to you within a few weeks. I'd like to thank the Director of the Postgraduate Programs, Dr. Amira Simha Alpern, for joining us today and for her continual support of ASPP. Our next membership drive will run throughout January of 2025. Please visit our website, www.adelphiaspp.org, for more information about us and our events. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Dustin Cahood, the chairperson of all our Meet the Author events and today's moderator. Dr. Cahood is a clinical psychologist, psychoanalyst, and author of Sex, Drugs, and Creativity, Searching for Magic in a Disenchanted World, which he wrote with Dr. Danielle Canafo. He has completed advanced training at Derner's postgraduate program in adult psychoanalysis and in group psychotherapy. He is an adjunct professor and clinical supervisor at the psychology doctoral programs of Adelphi University, LIU Post, and the Training Institute for Mental Health. He maintains a private practice for both individual and group psychotherapy. It's all yours, Dustin.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm so pleased to introduce Dr. Joseph Newirth, PhD. Joe is Professor Emeritus at the Gordon F. Derner School of Psychology at Adelphi University. He is on the faculty of several psychoanalytic institutes and was the director of the postdoctoral program in psychoanalysis at Adelphi University. His previous books received the Gradiva Prize and the American Board and Academy of Psychoanalysis Book Prize. That was in 2019, and the Gradiva Prize was 2004. He's currently in practice in New York City, and Dr. Newirth's prolific writing career has been inspired by his passion for teaching the concepts of psychoanalysis with an emphasis on an evolving language for dialogue on theory. So Joe, I was wondering if you could start by saying what compelled you to find personal meaning in the teaching of psychoanalytic concepts.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank ASPP for inviting me to be part of this today. And it really feels great. So thank you very much. I wanted to actually get to that, but I have been fascinated by the concept of the unconscious. When I was a kid in high school in Brooklyn, I had no idea of what psychoanalysis was. And by pure accident, I read this book called The 50-Minute Hour by Robert Linder, which was essentially a series of case studies that he had written. And I thought, this just blew me away completely. I found it so fascinating. And then I still didn't know much about psychoanalysis at all. And then when I began college, I read Freud's book, The Psychopathology of Everyday Life. And that kind of fleshed out began to flesh out ideas about that. And I was totally fascinated with that. And I became very interested in psychoanalysis from probably early on or sometime in college. And so I really kind of and I and I there was something about the idea of the unconscious that resonated completely with me. I don't know whether it was because I always thought that people had other motives besides what they said or something like that. And that's why in this book, The Unconscious, I quote for the introduction, the title of the introduction is "We Are Not Masters in Our Own House," and which comes from Freud. And I have always felt that. So I've been fascinated with psychoanalysis now for a very, very long time, going back to high school and college. And I think what I really like about teaching and what I've liked about teaching psychoanalysis is that I think there are a series of very complicated ideas that are often not very well integrated. You know, in the kind of language of psychoanalysis is sometimes very hard to grasp. And what I believe that I'm good at and want to think this is kind of taking complicated ideas and figuring out how to present them so that they become useful and usable.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, this isn't so that's what I think I love about teaching psychoanalytic ideas. And I have never, I have my preferences for different theories, but I've never believed any one theory is anything more than a belief system. You know, and I hope we'll talk about that a little bit later today. But like how we choose which belief systems we like is kind of a big question in my mind. In one of Ogden's papers, he talks about a poetry class he had in college, and what the kind of professor said to the students in this class is, "Don't tell me what you think the poem means, but tell me how you can use it." And I just felt that was just such a phenomenal way to think about something. So I'd like to think that when I teach about psychoanalysis and teach psychoanalysis, my focus is how to use these ideas.
Yeah, the metaphor of the wheel is a big part of, after reading the book, I have been, anytime I'm thinking about different theories, I'm struggling constantly to fit different theories into this metaphor of the wheel, where the center is Freud and his original conceptualization of the unconscious, and then the spokes are the different schools of thought that emerged and added to
Right,
his
right.
and
So I was this book that we're talking about, The Unconscious, is part of a series that Routledge has put out on contemporary psychoanalysis, an introduction to contemporary psychoanalysis. And I felt very honored when they asked me to write this. And it's a really interesting series. And one of our other kind of faculty members here, Rich Billow, is kind of finishing up a book that'll come out in the series shortly on group therapy. So I think that's great. I'm giving old Rich a little gotcha or something. And so that when I was writing the book, I kind of was trying to kind of think about how to understand multiple views of the unconscious. And the easiest way to think about it, or the easiest way that I started to think about it, was like a linear kind of evolution. Freud and Sullivan, and you could go on and have various things. And I thought that is actually not the way it is. That Freud's ideas haven't been eliminated. they're still very substantial. And so I thought of his ideas as represented as the hub of a wheel that everybody kind of learns and ends up using in some way. And then the different theories that emerge either kind of have their own ideas. And so I kind of conceptualize them as spokes coming out of this hub of Freud's ideas and the unconscious. And I actually think then that what makes something psychoanalytic is how the unconscious is conceptualized. That 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 we have this idea of a whole system of thought that's outside of awareness, and that has a huge influence on us. And so I thought of that as the hub. And and um, and then I'm sure, we each have our favorite spoke.
Uh-huh.
And kind of we use that. But I also think that for most contemporary psychoanalysts, that they are influenced by multiple theories, not just Freud, but actually all the theories that I write about in this book are all theories that I know well and that I feel very strongly influenced by. And so I always have a hard time defining which psychoanalytic theory or camp I belong to.
Mm. Right. Can you you mentioned that the structural theories you're more drawn to structural versus phenomenological.
Right.
Um,
So
yeah.
as I was working on this book, I realized that some of our theories kind of are much more phenomenological, meaning that they stay very close, they're very experientially near.
Mm.
Other theories have a kind of a structure underlying whatever it is that we experience. And that in those theories, the structure kind of like determines how things are. So, like for example, sorry. So like for example, the easy example is Freud's theory, which is kind of clearly very structural. We have the kind of id, ego, and superego, and how they are relating to each other, independent. Whereas you have someone like Kohut, who stays very kind of close to experience and rarely talks about structural ideas. So that would be kind of an illustration. And that
Mm.
within that, and this is again where I think people might want to talk about this a little bit, that people have different preferences. So like, I think I see interpersonal and relational theory as being more phenomenological and staying much closer to the experience. It's much more experience near. I see, Kohut. So I kind of put Kohut, Winnicott, and Fonagy together in what I call developmental theories of the unconscious. And they all tend to be much more phenomenological. Those theories have some structural elements in it, like the true self and false self, self as a subject and object in Winnicott's work, but that they kind of are much closer to the kind of experience within the session than thinking about the structure. Kleinian theory, which I'm very influenced by, is much more structural, and that it's kind of a very structural theory, as is Lacan, and so that, and I find myself personally, which I think about a lot, personally drawn to the more structural theories than the kind of phenomenological theories. And I've, I mean, clearly it's a kind of expression of some part of my personality. I used to think that I had like two parts to my personality that's getting, one would be somebody who's more poetic and one who's more like an engineer. And I think the engineer part of me really gets into the structural theory. It's like kind of a little building. But
Right.
I don't know if people have kind of made that observation about the difference between phenomenological and structural theories, But my guess is that it comes out in people's preferences. People who say, I don't like that theory, I really like that theory. And I think that might be the dimension that they're responding to.
Right. Right. The way the theorist writes and the language too. Speaking of Lacan, is that the
Right.
language of all of them are so it can be very different. And I was wondering if the different if you feel that part of this book and part of this part of this book is kind of translating or integrating the languages to be one
Right.
language fluent.
Well, I think this is my feelings about it. I think we get too taken up with a particular language of a theory, as opposed to thinking about the similarities, what the theories are trying to talk about. Let me try to illustrate that a drop. Kind of Kleinian theory, which has evolved a great deal, from Klein's work, but it's essentially all following the same path. Talks about symbolization a great deal. Talks about concrete thought and symbolic thought, and that has to do with the difference for them and that theory between the paranoid schizoid position and the depressive position. Fonagy, who is a very, I think, very erudite and interesting person, talks about mentalization. But I think when you look at those, what symbolization means and what mentalization means, they are very overlapping ideas. I wouldn't say that they're the same idea, but they overlap so much. And they're really talking about a certain capacity to think kind of separately from kind of action, demands for action, for example. So that, kind of, if you think symbolically, you can think about something, if it's real, if it's not real, if it's fantasy, if it's not fantasy. It becomes a much more complicated set of thoughts. Often kind of more metaphorical thinking falls in that. For Fonagy, if you can think in mentalization, you don't think that what's in my mind, what's in your own mind, is the same as what's real. That's an earlier form of thinking for him, as opposed to thinking, what's in my mind isn't the same as what's in the other person's mind. And so that it's about being curious. And I think that's a kind of however you want to think about it, either using the Kleinian terminology of symbolization or Fonagy's idea of mentalization. You can see it so clearly in our office. You know, when a kind of a patient comes in and is talking about something as if it's a hard fact, you know, and, you know, kind of it's just, there's no kind of separating the kind of the thought from the event, you know, and if we're kind of lucky, maybe we could help starting to separate that a little bit. But it's kind of a process of, you know, kind of like very concrete thinking. And, you know, and that as a patient evolves, as we work with someone, they become more able to kind of think about things in a phrase that I like from Hannah Siegel. It's like, what if? She thinks that's the key phrase in symbolization. What if it's real? What if it's not real?
What if these different writers had a more fluid dialogue? I think this is what part of the point you're
Oops.
making.
Just
Your what if. To use your what if, I just was wondering about how how you're trying to make it more fluid in this book. The languages might help bridge the gap between psychoanalysis and other methodologies and approaches that feel where psychoanalysis ends up being sort of alienated by that gap in understanding.
I absolutely think that's true. I'm understanding what you're saying. I feel like it would be really, really nice if we as analysts could talk about basic processes rather than using our kind of particular language. Like like for example, you know, in, you know, the idea of anxiety, you know, we kind of have that idea, but we don't kind of recognize that we're talking about either different things using the same word.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I think we have to find a way to talk about things so that it's much clearer, you know, and the kind of thing. So I feel like I would hope, I always have the wish, I think that's sort of, I always have the wish that that what I write will influence people who are not psychoanalysts to appreciate psychoanalysis. I think that is a wish that has receded many times in my mind because I haven't seen that happen, unfortunately. But that is an intention of mine.
Mm-hmm. And so when you were writing this, though, you had that was part of your goal, was to have it also be understandable for people who are not in the field. Is that right?
Right. And one of the central ideas that I believe in is what a theory's idea of the unconscious is determines exactly how that theory works psychoanalytically. And you know, it's, you know, and I think it's very clear in each of the theories that I describe in the book, each of those spokes that you are thinking about, kind of illustrate that, so it's not just an abstract idea that's floating around. Like clearly for Freud, the unconscious was this kind of organization that had a lot of secrets in it, that had things we did not want to know.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that the kind of psychoanalytic method was kind of devised, Freud devised it so that we could have, through the method of free association, you know, the analysts could start to kind of figure out this puzzle of what was hidden and either make an interpretation or make a construction. And so that it was always about, which was one of Freud's kind of favorite metaphors, an archaeological model. You were digging something up and putting something together from the past. Kind of switching to kind of interpersonal and relational theory is that Sullivan, which I was thinking about when I said anxiety before, for Freud, the source of anxiety was kind of these unacceptable desires and wishes that the child had, and the fear that they would kind of come out, and then the child would be kind of punished, castrated. For Sullivan, he was very clear, and for a lot of his contemporary other analysts, but who were emerging at the time, that that the source of anxiety was other people. Kind of punitive aspects of the parents. And that he kind of, his idea of the unconscious, which I think is a wonderful idea, is that the kind of restriction that these things kind of created. So that the person was very restricted as a way of avoiding the kind of the punitive attitudes, the anxiety was there. And so that, that theory kind of moves us out of the unconscious as a drive-centered thing into a relational, which is what relational psychoanalysis happened to do. It moved it into a kind of a totally relational experience, which then kind of expanded. It was the expansion in kind of a relational model, where kind of the idea of that is that the kind of patient starts to experience kind of a new way of being in terms of their relationship with the analyst. And that's kind of the analyst then becomes a new object, not just an old object. So that expands it. There's also, which is, I think, an important idea coming out of relational theory, and as well as, other theories, that it's a model of growth as opposed to kind of resolving old conflicts.
I was wondering how, like, your poet self might be able to bring to life these concepts that are esoteric to these to more general audiences, and bring up their curiosity about the theories rather than being intimidated by them. That they're like art; they evoke emotion.
Right. No, I think this is a very important thing that you're highlighting. I think many of the kind of more contemporary theories, I'm thinking about, the kind of developmental theories, the Kleinian theories, and the kind of Lacanian language-based theories, kind of all are really focused on a model of growth rather than conflict resolution.
Right.
And so that they all see, I think that they see separating out kind of aspects of reality, or much of reality, from intimate, personal, or subjective experiences. So you have two kinds of experiences. And I think most of the work we do as psychoanalysts are kind of focused on people's intimate lives. But that's, in various ways. And I think that one part of that is kind of art or poetry or metaphors, that's the structure of the unconscious. The unconscious, um, like, you know, Lacan and Made Blanco, who I talk about in the chapter on language-based kind of views of the unconscious, perspectives on the unconscious. Those two theorists both take Freud's book on dreams as the core of the unconscious.
Mm.
You know, as do
Right.
quantum theorists. And that
Yeah.
if you think about how we work with dreams, what we think about with dreams is that dreams are very metaphoric. And by that I mean it's like you have a single image that stands for so many things. It kind of keeps, if you have a dream, it keeps generating new meanings as you think about it.
Right.
Right? And that's the structure of a metaphor. You know,
Yeah.
a metaphor keeps kind of creating new meanings. It's not like objectively defined.
Right. Right. And I love these metaphors for in the changing cultural context of the unconscious, the metaphors of Frankenstein, Spellbound, and World War Z.
Right.
I love it.
So one of the kind of things I believe that I wanted to make clear in the book is that our ideas of the unconscious are not just kind of like different people coming up with different ideas, that they are all kind of located and locatable in a particular time frame. You know, and the time frame is it has all kinds of things happening, economic things, other things. And so I like movies, so I found 3 movies that I could use. So Frankenstein is clearly the old Freudian id,
Hmm.
some monster who escapes, who terrifies the world and needs to be put down, literally. You know, and he is the creation of Dr. Frankenstein. So he's must be Dr. Frankenstein's id, you know, who's escaped and who he can't tolerate it. So we could all, I'm sure we've all had the experience of our own monsters escaping. So, I mean, that's why I don't think any of these models are dead. You know?
Right.
Um,
Right.
I don't know if people know the movie Spellbound, but if you don't, you have to watch Spellbound. Because firstly, it's a movie about psychoanalysis. And Hitchcock made it, but he has at the beginning a quote about how psychoanalysis is treatment for healthy people or something like that. And so,
Hmm.
so that the kind of the theme of Spellbound is that Gregory Peck has amnesia, but he is hiding out because he he's flooded with guilt over thinking that he murdered somebody. And so hiding out. So he's in this institution where he is having psychoanalysis. And there's Grace Kelly, who's learning to be an analyst, and her supervisor, whose name I forget, and they're trying to analyze him. And one of the great things in this movie is that Salvador Dali did a film sequence of a dream, which is very surreal, really wonderful. And so then part of the movie is that they're analyzing This is his dream, where he kind of sees a murder that he thinks he committed, and he didn't commit it. But what the movie is about, but what it's not just about helping him see that he didn't murder this guy on a ski slope, but that he has an old childhood guilt, thinking that he might have been responsible for his brother's death. So it's a very psychoanalytic thing. Now the theme, so that's the theme, and the people who looked at the film and analyzed it see that as a real post-World War II noir film. And they think that these post-World War II noir films were about the guilt people felt coming home from the war. That they describe this as kind of like guilt, and it's the guilt of thinking that you're a bad person when in fact you're not. And it's almost, and it's a kind of really interesting film, interesting, I think, discussion of the film about like kind of the guilt that people felt after the war. And if you have parents, grandparents who've been either in World War II or any subsequent war, people are very reluctant to talk about their experiences in war. And I think one of the reasons, based on this kind of spellbound story, is that they have a lot of guilt. Kind of more contemporary wars, people have PTSD, which is kind of a function of feeling that they've done some bad things often, or that they've seen bad things, or bad things have happened. And so the kind of World War II is different. A lot of kind of more recent wars, because there was a sense of good and bad, as opposed to the ambiguity of wars that we. So I don't know if people know the movie World War Z, kind of, which I see, I don't remember, it was not that long ago. It's a movie about zombies. And
Yes.
I think what I felt, and I'm not the only one, so, is that this is a representation of contemporary experience. That because essentially the zombies are the walking dead, and a lot of patients that we have, contemporary patients, have a sense that they're not fully alive, and there's that part of it. And the zombies are, I don't know, I'm smiling because I like the film.
Yeah.
So, but the zombies are compulsively kind of eating without satisfaction. And so that it's kind of like the kind of metaphor would be that kind of contemporary people are consuming but not having any satisfaction.
Right.
Which I think is a kind of an interesting thing, that that for the contemporary patient is that there's both a feeling of numbness or deadness, there's a kind of feeling of a lack of satisfaction, and there's a sense of just compulsively going through life, whether it's consuming or just doing whatever you're going to do.
And this was pre-social media and scrolling, and everyone.
Oh, right, you're gonna do right, exactly. Talk about consuming without satisfaction.
Yeah. Thinking there's
Dustin's going to be doing a talk.
Right. Yes. Of thinking that, giving this illusion that there is, that at some point you will reach, if you just get enough likes, you will find a complete state of satisfaction.
Right.
Um,
Right. And I think in many ways, I mean, the two theories that I think capture that for me the best are kind of contemporary Kleinian theory and Lacanian theory. Um, and um, and the kind of the Kleinian theory is because people are doing something kind of this compulsive, either scrolling, you know, or consuming without satisfaction, but it's a compulsiveness of it that is, without any satisfaction, and that's kind of a key. And for Lacan, that would be all in the imaginary,
mhm,
where
mhm.
you think I'm gonna this is gonna make me happy, and then you get home and nothing makes you happy.
Right,
Or,
right,
I'll get more likes. I don't, you know, I
right.
get
Yeah,
more followers, I'll be happy.
right,
That
right.
happen. Um, so the last chapter of the book is my kind of a discussion of a patient. And I think the discussion is kind of heavily influenced by contemporary Kleinian thinking. And so contemporary Kleinian thinking kind of has moved into this place that I think I find very interesting to talk about it, which is kind of a movement into field theory, where you and the patient are kind of in a field and you're never sure whose ideas, where an idea comes from, who has an idea or not. And maybe should I say something a little bit about that case?
Yeah,
Um,
yes. Yeah,
so
please.
this was a person who I was working with, who um, I guess I'm jumping from the zombie film to this man, because he felt like his life was without meaning, totally meaningless, and I can't even say that he was unhappy because it was just like the way it was. He would describe to me his day, you know, he'd go to work, come home, have a brief meal, go to sleep, go to work, have a brief meal, go to sleep. I mean, I'm saying it with a lot more energy than he did, you know, and
Mhm.
I'm sure everybody has patients like this. Um, and one of the things that has fascinated me, both as a therapist and a teacher and a supervisor, is how hard it is sometimes to work with people. And I think kind of, for me, a lot of Kleinian theory helps you deal with that very well. Um, and so, here it is, he's suffering. I have to say, I'm suffering. I have all these thoughts like, what am I doing here? Am I helping this
Right.
man? Not helping this man.
Yeah.
Just a kind of very distracted thought. And this is where the kind of the is that I think what's really important, what I take from some theory is that you have to kind of treat your own mind the same way you would treat anybody else's mind. That whatever is going on in your mind has some meaning,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
Whether you know it or not, this is going back to the kind of conversation about the unconscious, that
Right.
that whatever's going on. So it's very hard, but I try to kind of stay with all of those feelings. of not knowing what's happening, or more importantly, self-doubt about what's happening.
Right.
So then I'm starting to have, or I started to have, this reverie experience of of like an kind of I guess you could say like an old movie or an old image, but I'm sure I thought of it as a movie, um, where there's this kind of disheveled old guy in a prison cell, close, slowly crossing off the days of the week, of the month, of the year, just kind of crossing off the days of his life. And that became a persistent image that I had with this patient.
Mm-hmm.
And finally I decided to tell him about the image. Now, I've thought about this a lot, I've written about it and stuff, what I realized is that honestly, I'm not sure who the old man was, whether it was me crossing off the days of my life or him crossing off the days of his life. And how would you know, that, and so I told him about it. And this was one of those times that something worked. And all of a sudden he said, oh, that's just like the old TV show Gunsmoke. And it turned out he spent years and years all by himself in his room watching episodes of Gunsmoke over and over again. And we then began talking about Gunsmoke and this whole kind of world that he lived in, which was just his own world all by himself, that he never had somebody else to kind of enter that world with him. So that in some way, that was a moment that I was able to enter the world with him.
Mm.
And, we went back to the kind of the difficult times many times after that. It wasn't that one time kind of change, but it, in terms of this model that I was saying about growth, it was a beginning of a process of growth. And just to kind of link this with kind of what I was saying about Fonagy and his idea of mentalization, Fonagy has a very interesting idea for people who kind of play all by themselves in their rooms, that they are able to enter this kind of isolated world, which he calls the pretend mode. But unless you could pretend with others, that you are never able to get out of it. That he talks about the importance of being able to play, with other people.
Right.
So that was kind of a step in that direction.
Have you found this to be a challenge in this contemporary, in times now where it seems there's these echo chambers of the algorithms that we're shown news and we're shown information that's specifically geared towards us in a way that we miss a lot of opposing ideas that, and at the same time don't know if what's real or what's not real. Just, if people are more, have their heels dug in more about their beliefs or more certain about their uncertainty. Have you?
That's a kind of a really great question, because it's a real challenge to a lot of our psychoanalytic theories. And I think there's two things about what you're describing with kind of media and, this echo chamber type thing. Everything is said as if it's a fact.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing is said as if it's a possibility or with an inference connected to it or a question connected to it or curiosity. about it. I mean, it's just, I mean, I have recently felt so burned out by the kind of flood of information about politics that's
Mhm.
coming. And everything's a fact. It's never a possibility. And
Right.
so in that way, from my point of view, is that part of that um, way of being in the media and having that is that everything is presented as if this is a fact right now.
Mhm.
You know,
Right.
and I find that for myself pretty overwhelming, and I suspect everybody gets burned out, or that they cling to that, little straw so that they don't drown. The kind of experience that we have with the newspapers and various media, and it's not only an echo chamber but you hear everything over and over again, which is actually exhausting. But it's
Right.
almost said as if it's an absolute fact. It's the most concrete, you know, non-symbolic, non-mentalized.
So, like with psychoanalysis now, I guess, and the metaphor of the wheel with Freud as the hub and the spokes are the other
Right.
post-Freudian thought. Um, it seems maybe there's a similar thing that is, I mean, that's sort of a way of integrating and not being in an echo chamber to be thinking about it this way.
That's what,
Whereas, yeah,
right. Like I hope that, like when people read my book, they find something interesting in each different model,
hmm yeah,
of kind of the analytic theory and therapy. And so that if you find something interesting in each of them, you don't have to believe this is the absolute fact. I think
right,
that kind of belief in kind of this is the right thing to do is so kind of destructive. And I suspect that it has not done psychoanalysis, a good turn to have different theories, each presenting themselves as if they're correct and everyone else is not correct,
hmm
as
right,
opposed to looking for the kind of what I would say is how these theories overlap and what they're trying to do. You know,
right. And the wheels keep on turning.
exactly.